Okay, well, welcome. I wanted to begin just by welcoming everyone. We'll give just a couple minutes to allow attendees to enter. Apologies for starting a few minutes late. Let's see. Okay. All right. So first off, I want to begin just by giving a little bit of a shout out to Falon Mayanja and thanking her for introducing me to 2 out of 3 panelists, which is really sort of incredible. Without that support and without that connection, this wouldn't have happened. On behalf of Artworkers Italia, I want to thank you for joining us as an audience. And I really want to extend a warm welcome to the panelists. For me, it's really an honor to be in dialogue with them. And I'm hoping that it's really just sort of the first of many conversations that are to come. My name is Justin Randolph Thompson, and I'm part of the collective Artworkers Italia that came together during the first lockdown in order to respond to sort of the economic conditions of artists and art workers, which were laid bare under the pandemic, where we had sort of a request for culture as entertainment, and that was immense, while at the same time, the value that was being attributed to these resources developed in support of this sector was really shameful. Yet, I think it was really an indication of some of the broader ways in which culture and art and contemporary culture specifically is viewed in the context of Italy. HYPERUNIONISATION is a project that has been developed with the support of European Culture of Solidarity Fund, with which we are seeking to share and highlight the work of organizations and individuals that are engaging in much needed work of rethinking social, economic, and spiritual value in regards to contemporary art, and problematizing some of the traditional forms of support. This conversation is one of 3 how-to conversations, structured, practical, and applicable reflections on designing collective strategies across Europe. I'm particularly happy to be moderating this conversation tonight to bring forth a range of questions that are often overlooked in a context that is not only riddled with a lack of value that's given to contemporary art and contemporary culture, but one in which forms of canonization, institutional structures, historical narration, all these things become sort of facades that hide layers of xenophobia, racism, sexism, and a general governing body that doesn't, a lot of times is willingly uninformed about the many facets of local realities that have been marginalized and racialized. So this conversation tonight sort of teases out questions around how to institute. And it's one that brings together an incredible group of people who are involved in the building of spaces that I'm not sure would be defined as institutions. I think we had a conversation earlier about how maybe they're not, but platforms and other forms that are sort of counter structures in a certain sense, and creating alternatives to the institutions themselves, really. The 3 realities that are with us tonight through 3 panelists are consciously constructing new platforms and realities that know, for us across Europe, a lot of these panelists all know that the issue in Europe extends way beyond a lack of resources or a lack of access or a lack of policies into the role of developing systems of support and sharing, but that are about the sort of well-being and collectivity while engaging in a language that is critically capable of framing and celebrating beyond the tokenism that is often an institutional reality. So tonight's speakers are engaged in the work of generating an alternative center or core to ground and expand the work of artists and culture. In Italy, we're facing sort of a massive exodus, and have been for many years, of young artists and young people in general from the country that is fostered in part by a lack of care that needs to go into community building and re-narrating history while developing care and respect for those across creative fields. Ironically, I think in the context of Italy, and I don't think it's just us, the perception of the movement of people in the country through the mass media lens is really focused on what tends to be quoted at around 25,000 people that are entering the country, and not focused on the nearly 250,000 young people that are leaving the country. And they're leaving a lot of times based on a value system that has been instituted. So tonight, we're really sort of happy to be joined by realities that are thinking about different ways of creating a sense of support and structure around our work. So I'll give a really brief introduction to each of the speakers, and then we will be beginning just with a series of questions. So Arlette-Louise Ndakoze is a philosopher, fiction writer, and curator, and artistic co-director of SAVVY Contemporary, which is a laboratory for form ideas, a discursive platform and a space for conviviality, founded on a series of really incredible pillars, which include the Colonial Neighbors Project as a participatory archive of German colonial history, SAVVYZЛR, which challenges traditional forms of the archive through the language of performativity, SAVVYZLR focused on negotiating and delinking on the air, and also publications, a record label, residencies, design, and performance. And this is only a short list of some of the realities that SAVVY actually represents. Mawena Yehouessi is an art curator and researcher in the arts and philosophy, also trained in cultural projects, management, and contemporary dance. Mawena is the founder of the collective platform Blacks to the Future, which comes together around an Afrofuturist perspective that unsettles disciplinarity and classification by being both medium and a broadcasting platform for media. The platform has some really incredible facets, including syncretics designed to bring sort of a bite-sized reflections that are mouthfuls and that amalgamate a range of reflections and ideas and provide sources for deeper reflection. A software section framing the approaches and strategies relating to multimedia augmentation and navigation tool for oral and general history of Africa called Les Diabolés. I apologize for my French pronunciation. I'm really not there. But Blacks to the Future also brings together an annual festival. And lastly, but not least, we are joined by Emmanuel Nsunda, conservator, restorer of works of art, and archaeometer by training, specialized in the study of intangible cultural heritage. Emmanuel is the founder of the project Afrofeminism in Progress, with an aim of exploring decolonial issues from the perspective of Afro-descendant women. Emmanuel has designed and advanced many projects that grapple with the notion of care in relation to history and the role of performative activism as an artistic practice. The works highlight the role of museums and institutions in caring for objects of the past, while being conscious of the ways in which in Europe, they frequently care for the aesthetic and formal values and not for the spiritual values that these works hold. So the panelists will be responding to 3 core questions, one at a time before we open it up to questions from the audience. So you can feel free to write into the chat or into the question and answer to pose your questions, and we will attend to them a little bit later. So without going any further, we'll begin with the very first question that follows this welcome. The first question explores the limitations of the notion of access. And so the question that I would pose to all of you is access to pre-existing institutions on the part of those marginalized in various geographies enough? And to really think about why or why not. So with no particular order, I think we can just one at a time chime in and think this out loud. And again, I want to welcome you.
Hi, so I may start. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us and meeting us. So my name is Mawena, and I'm here on behalf of Blacks to the Future Collective. So regarding this first question of access, or this kind of pre-given access from the institution and how it might or might not be enough, I would say it's never enough. But for kind of multiple reasons, it isn't enough because I guess that no one regrouping at some point can only rely on what the institution gives, because the institution's role is really a conservative role to kind of bring in this kind of a society organization and then, I don't know, create those rules and then save them, structure them. And I guess also that what we try to do on different levels, on different layers, is also and always to anticipate, hack and yeah, deconstruct, but also reconstruct different ways of organizing ourselves. So on regard to that, on a very kind of yeah, content level, I would say, no, the institution cannot be enough. But then on also other concrete realities, and because Blacks to the Future is a French-based collective, it is important to me, I guess, to kind of quickly explain also the French support system regarding art propositions or cultural propositions. I guess that France is really this kind of a weird country where the state does help until some point cultural initiatives. Cultural initiatives being art-related initiatives, but not only. It can also be community-based programs. It can also be programs that are more, let's say, sport-related or etc. But the fact is, in France, there are these kind of grant systems. I will not go in details, obviously, but it is something really important. And I also know that if we are to speak on a European scale, it is super important to acknowledge that being a very, very, very great amount of luck compared to other countries in Europe. These being said, and then this is always the question, how do you get access to those grants? How do you get access to those spaces? And obviously on paper, they are available to everyone, but we always know they are not. Why? And here we dig into also the specifics of the French system, which is also a system which is, I would say, first and foremost, really class-based system organizing, and very class-based, let's say. What do I mean here is that France is really this kind of country where you need to have this kind of CV curriculum. You need to have made a lot of different things in order to access spaces that are supposedly made for emerging people. So you have this kind of ambiguity that doesn't work. And it makes what, so at the end, we do have this kind of open platform by the states, but we are unable to reach those criteria they are asking for. Why? Because of course we are too young, but also we come from, let's say, academics or non-academics background that are not relevant to the state criteria. But also we propose things whose formats do not satisfy the habits also of the state definition of what this culture is. And thus, at the end of the day, we have this very, I don't know, amazing system, and it is an amount of money, but is at the end, it is so paradoxical that so many actual artists from outside of France are really, it is easier for them to get those grants rather than for French people that work there. And just to wrap on this really first question, I'm going to give a very simple example. So I think it was last year with the collective, we've been invited to participate to a colloquium where we would be doing both the visual material to communicate on the project, but also participate to the discussions and eventually do an artwork. And so we asked for something, and this was a very institutional invitation. And obviously at some point we asked for something which was super, I think, genuine. Okay, and what about the fee? And the answer was, well, you know, we're actually spending the few money we have for art workers in order to invite people from the global south. Meaning that us being people of color from this country, we were not able to be paid because there was this kind of hierarchy. And so all of a sudden, this access or this so-called access is not an access at all. So that's what I would say for this very first question.
Thank you.
You can go ahead, Emmanuel.
Okay, I don't know. It's because I can relate with what you just said. So maybe I wanted to speak about the situation in Belgium because I don't think so. I don't think that we have enough access within the pre-existing institutions. And I would like, firstly, to precise that I have a focus on the fate of the people of color, especially the Black people in the cultural field. So I won't be able to talk about all the marginalized groups, but mostly Black people, knowing that inside of this group, we generally see the same kind of the people represented, like the cisgender men, valid, heterosexual, and light-skinned, and that's a new, very important things to notice when it comes to what kind of people we are ready to hear. So it doesn't mean that we don't see people of color and Black people as artists, as curators here in Belgium. There are a few, but they exist, and I am a living proof. But it's very important to observe the role and the spaces dedicated for those people within the institutions. And I would like to speak about the huge discussion that we had at the time and after the entire process of the decolonization of the African Museum here in Brussels, formerly called the MRAC. In French, it's the Musée Royal de l'Afrique Centrale. Which gather a very huge collection of hundreds of thousands of objects, artworks, natural and cultural resources from DRC mainly. And a group of 6 people has been consulted during the process by the museum employees. But actually the negotiations were very complicated because it seemed extremely difficult for those employees to step out from the Western vision of the exhibition, of the museology, of what should be shown or not. And the voices and the expertise of the people of African descent hasn't been clearly heard. And the timing also is often very problematic because when it comes of consultants, the institution often ask the advices after that the main decision has been already taken, has been already been made. Oh, sorry. And I also see a problem of the way those institutions welcome artistical projects and cultural projects from marginalized peoples. And most of the time, it is classified as diverse. It's not part from the production of the main culture of Belgian culture, if I can say it like this, like it. It is seen as always from abroad. And this way we don't see the narratives created from diverse people who still belong to the Western culture. There is a kind of blindness for the production of people from the minorities here in Belgium. And I think that's it's one of the main problems is who is entitled to define and to recognize the knowledge and the culture. And as long as the marginalized never get to write the rules, to take the decisions, or to be in charge at some point, we're always going to hit the same wall, and we will keep to think that keep seeing the point of view as dominant, as universal, and the narrative won't never change. And maybe one last thing, it's when it comes to the problem of the grants and the funds, where the funds are also offered by the states and open to everyone. But when you're from a minorities, you often need to apply for a fund related to international development or equal justice, and we are totally out of our first purpose. And we must join those expectations. We must respond to the state expectation to be able to have money to proceed. So that's a really important problem to me, because we need to constantly choose a strategy or another in order to be able to show or to produce our work. So that's it.
Thank you for these insights. I really would like to question that precise question, and specifically the concept of institution and geography, which will then inform the concept of margins. And so to understand if the access to pre-existing institutions is enough on behalf of for marginalized people in various geographies. I understand that we are still in a trap, in this conceptual trap that states something on paper and acts differently. And so maybe from the end, geography is actually still a mindset. We are not, I mean, I talk about the conceptual we as how it is understood in the West as citizens and not necessarily first human beings. So who has the capacity or who has the right to be active part of that constitution? And in that term, we are not in Germany or France or Italy or Greece and further regions of that construction of the West, but we are in the mindset of what is understood as the West and is still in a constitution that has been presumably built upon a so-called democracy, representative democracy, which is basically just meaning there are some persons proposing concepts. It needs to be in alliance with the constitution, which itself also has been changed throughout many centuries, and now and over the centuries questioned from their own statements as is it really human, who counts as human, and then who counts as citizen, and then what democracy means, of course, is then a consequence of that. For example, that those who are not regarded as part of the main society have not the same right to influence that building or establishment of a value system that Justin, you have talked about when you say that if it's 250,000 Italians go away from Italy based on the value system that has been institutionalized. I think you haven't explicitly said what is that institutionalized value system, but I presume it is that one which looks very good on the surface. And when we look on the actions, it excludes directly. Why? Because, I mean, how? I know many reasons why, but I just see how in the effects it has, this is what I think it's come through what Emmanuel and Mawena, you mentioned, which means that, for example, if I talk about Germany, the Article 5 in our foundational institution says that science, education, and I have the concrete, because it's very, as you say, we spend so much time to look on how can we still be part of a certain reality making. And I really like that term reality also that Justin, you have taken on to describe us as human beings and not human or citizen, because these also have so many implications that need to be understood, but I think it comes through reality. And so that's why so much is based on paperwork, because the reality of the West is based on paper. It's not really consistent. And so that's why I just look directly in that. So art, science, research, and Lehre, which is a way to mediate research knowledge, and this would be to teach. These are free. The freedom of teaching does not say that you are disconnected from the faithfulness this should be always in conjunction with the Constitution. So this is one passage of Article 5. And then some persons ask themselves, what does it then mean for the ones first who are not regarded as art or science and so on? And then those who are already excluded from a certain constitution, because this constitution is not doing what it says, but it is still a mindset which is saying that when the ideologies have been developed, and mainly from philosophers like Kant and Hegel, and Kant in his text von den menschlichen Rassen, of the human races, knowing that there is just one human race, if we want to go into the etymology. So existences that can reproduce themselves, and each of us can. And then Hegel in this lecture on phenomenology, history, explaining that certain group of realities don't have history. And that concept of history was based on what is written, the evidence which can be controlled. But interestingly, Emmanuel, when you talk about these museums with so many objects that give you evidence of a reality, these are not regarded as history. So it is what someone claims on paper, which is also very fragile, you know. So I really want to question that first. And I personally don't seek to be aligned with a certain conception that I think is already exclusive. I think, and that's the main work I think we're all doing, is with continuing still to have possibility to do what we do, always also in parallel question that concept that is excluding, and to talk about Savvy Contemporary as a space that also is constantly questioning how that which we do is really embracing complexities, and that complexity of the living, which makes the strength of each of us. So allowing each of us space in the way we think, and still come together in certain points that we agree on. And so when in 2009, Bonaventure Sobejeng-Diku founded Savvy Contemporary, and since then, I mean, as an artistic director, it is actually more than that, this multifaceted way that we engage in the space. As Justin, you said, we are a laboratory, which means the main part of our work is research, to look on what has been there. And this is the value of, or the part of institution I would like to underline in the work we do. It is continuity. It is not to start anew, so not to break what in the sense of modernity has been at work, and then to claim nothing has been there before, but really do the work. And it's difficult because many things on purpose were meant not to be seen, although they're still there because we are still there, and they are Black people in the future, and we are present, and we will be present tense in the future. And so it is not so easy because we have not been, I mean, many of us taught that way in the schools, maybe at home but not in the schools. So there was this conflict of who are we actually in these societies, diasporic societies, or on the continent, which still are in the colonial way, disseminating knowledge. But research has been is one of these pillars, actually the all-encompassing pillars of Savvy Contemporary, which then builds on these common denominators. I would call them these pillars that we understand is the constant work we should engage with, which is the colonial reality in Germany, the continuity of it. Then when we talk about SAVVYZЛR, is the creation of new content, new knowledge based on what has been there and which we want to share. Then we have the performance pillar, which is a creation, articulation through the body in various ways. Mind, body, complexities. We have now, since this year, SAVVYZЛR, which brings on the, I would call them sonic histories and realities. So the living part of what has maybe been agreed on, if it's on paper or different ways of acting. The design part, to understand that also colonial ideologies are still in the way we write. I wonder, even personally, because all of us what makes Savvy also all these elements we bring together in the soup, all these ingredients. And my main concern is, why is that until today, knowledge is still valued when it is in a certain block writing on a paper or on a screen, pressed, printed, packaged, and there you are. So why would someone value more that which is also confirmed already by a certain publishing house, and not what you yourself see as something which is valuable? So this relevance you talked about, Mawena, these are the things that I really question all the time, because it means that these institutions or the states would only see something as valuable when something has been confirmed again already. So we level up, which means that we don't move, and we consistently are in the colonial mindset. So for example, I started 2 years ago a blog called Akayuvu, which is about memory and to pass on African science in the philosophies, and also to understand that philosophies are not as so limited as in the West on paper, but on the speaking, on poems, sonic creations. So these are the things I really defy. That's why first I was like, how can I call myself even a philosopher? But then I'm like, it's not that even so interesting to say I'm a philosopher, because it's just a practice, right? And so then I was okay with that, because every one of us has a practice and a certain focus. And then people ask, oh, what have you written? And when I say nothing, I'm doing radio, I'm bringing that on in lectures, but they mean written on paper. That's why I see nothing. When we constantly write from the impressions we have. So these are the ways, and publishing is speaking about something. And back then it has been that understanding, that publishing. So these things to defy them and to bring something on that has been really building up cultures in the way that they can freely move together.
Thank you so much for that series of responses. And I think, Arlette, the fact that you bring up complexity, I think that complexity is probably one of the things that I think tends to be lacking a lot of times when we think about Afro-descendant people and cultures, right? It's this complexity that is actually needed. But I actually really appreciate that you bring up sort of geography as a mindset, but also the constitutional frameworks and the ways in which those actually connecting also to what Mawena was saying are sort of some of the conservative values that are instilled. And those are a lot of times those values that construct the margins, that tell us what those margins are. And they're also the same structures that place expertise in a very specific realm, right? They place those values in a very specific way. So I think that what Emmanuel points out is like, who gets to define those terms? Who gets to create the language that then provides those frameworks? And I think complexity is really embedded also in the ways in which we talk about, access to grants, right? This not being recognized within the sort of, the nationalistic frameworks, or as what Mawena said, the satisfaction of habits, right? Not being able to to fit those things, I think is all about the ways in which they're constructed in the first place, you know? So I think that there's a lot of really wonderful connections and super problematic connections, of course, as well. So to pass into the second question, I wanted to think a little bit about what we actually frame as labor. So I think a lot of times we talk about work and labor in very specific ways that we feel that we can define very cleanly, right? But I think that there's an article that came out about Black Canadian curators that said, you know, the Black curator is never just a curator. And I think in thinking about that question, the idea that the Black artist or curator is never just an artist or curator, I'm interested in sort of reflecting upon what it means to sort of shift the understanding of the work that's not being paid for, the work that's not being valued, the work that comes along with being hired as an artist or being hired as a curator, but all the other things that need to happen within an institutional framework where these boundaries and borders have been really constructed in a way that need to be problematized, and that's work. You know, so I'm wondering if you could each speak to just these sorts of layers of that undocumented often and certainly under-considered labor.
I'm going. Well, I think it also is totally related to what Arlette you just said and what Justin you jumped into, talking about this complexity. But at the same time, there's also this thing where the first question was more, or we answered it also from the perspective of our groups and those realities we represent, those collective realities. And then all of a sudden, this second question may or might seem like a more individual question. However, I think that in between this shift, there is this complexity idea. And for instance, the question being, a Black artist, curator, a Black art worker is never just an art worker or a cultural worker. Well, it depends, again, also I think of the position and the view from which you're seeing it. For the institution, there's these two things. I will take myself as an individual. So obviously the institution loves me because I'm also Black, because at some point I'm able to fill in a box they need for their diversity purpose or whatever. And so they're super happy. And so all of a sudden there will be some value for them, but it will not reflect necessarily on the access. So I will not find value in being Black, but they will construct the value they constructed on the very Blackness they originally constructed, because it is them who at some point defined this. So when we're talking also about this kind of looping of the institution that is just looping on itself, well, yes, I do 100% agree, Arlette, when you're saying, yeah, well, it's just the same colonial framework. Like, we need Black people at some point to say, yeah, we're super open, even if we created this kind of shift or whatever. But if I change the perspective and look at it from the collectivity I'm about, well, to my Blacks to the Future colleagues, well, in between ourselves, I'm not necessarily being a Black artist or creator with an extra value due to that Blackness, because paradoxically, it is that Blackness that made us join in the first place. So this kind of Blackness becomes our collective value, but it is not an individual value anymore. And so in this case, whatever I do and is valued for by my community can be either as an answer, so this kind of external value towards the institution, or can not be valued, but what is going to be valued is my worth as a being part of this community. So I'm sorry, my English is kind of weird, but I'm kind of trying to make this slight differentiation really on the point of view. And then I think that at some point, I'm not to expect that the institution, which is looping on itself, would value anything but take value, because this is what the institution does, not create value or recognize value, but take value to use it for itself. But what I'm really interested in is being a Black artist or a Black art worker that at some point is able to do some things. And so to grant some access to, again, those spaces, those grants, those also having, I don't know, the tools like a computer to be able to communicate towards the public. This becomes something that is and will always be valued and paid for because of the recognition of my own community. So there's also this ambiguity of what kind of value are we expecting? Because actually every time I do an artwork or performance, or I don't know, like even a class with students, well, the institution may not value that, but I do have the value every time a student is coming back to me and saying, thank you for this very specific word, or thank you for this reference. So this is where I do keep also and do find the value and the payment. So I don't know, there's always this kind of ambiguity of this perfect world where we would be able not to rely anymore on the institutional valuing of things, but at the same time, we need that minimum of external value in order to be able to create some inner community-based value. So there is this kind of thing, and I think that this complexity is precisely what being a Black art worker might be.
If I may, I like the way you talk about the extra value that the institution find in us and in our work, just because of our Blackness. But I regret the fact that it is often expected for the Black curator to endorse an educational work within the institutions, and not about whatever subject, but specifically about racial issues, or how make the cultural institutions more diverse. Or, and it means that all the time that is dedicated to this work, it keeps them away from their first interests and the research and the first practices. And I sadly observe a lot of talented people, and my fellow ones, being used by the cultural industry. And it is a way to token them and to prevent those institutions from being too hegemonic or being not diverse enough. So these kinds of words for me is these kinds of assignments has a weight and has a cost, and it costs a lot of money. Firstly, the money that we spent into our own education, and then we are not allowed to produce something related to this education, so it's kind of lost at the end of the day. It costs inner balance, sometimes our mental health, because we are often isolated in front of a lot of a large amount of white people, and we have to repeat ourselves all the time. And meanwhile, sometimes we see our fellows from high school or whatever leading their own project, and we have to cope with it. And it costs us our time, because we don't get to develop our own projects. And there is also a paradox, I think, in between this behavior from the institution within and those expectation and the paradox that and the suspicion, that we want something else than propose our cultural research or artistic approach, and that our agenda is always built on racial issues or a kind of need of revenge about the colonial past, and that we won't be neutral ever, we will force people to feel guilty about whatever we want to bring into this world. So I have this example. Once I applied for a job for a museum in my hometown. It was actually a colonial museum. And the jury asked me if I would be able to keep a distance with the history of those objects and my own history. And I often receive this question from my teachers at schools, and I feel that people are very concerned about it. So I spend a lot of time to explain myself and my presence, and to earn the right to be there, and to constantly prove that we are legit, and and the neutrality is not a thing, actually, that we need to accept that we speak from a point of view, and we don't have to ask for certain people to always explain themselves and not the others. I hope that I'm clear when I say it like that.
Yeah, very interesting. Actually, I have a question to Emmanuel and Mawena. When you talk about Blackness, do you mean Blackness or Africanness? It's really a constant question I have to my community, if it's in Germany, in Europe, or in an African continent, and listening to both of you. But I have just an idea that maybe when you talk about Blackness is the way it is conceived from the outside, from these institutions, and the way they confirm that what they do it because they don't really engage with what it is inside of these epistemologies we bring on. And when we talk about Africanness, because you mentioned this in regards to Blacks to the future, if it's more, again, if it's a mindset, if it's in, the values that come together. I just have these questions, if we can share that.
Well, precisely here, I was indeed talking about Blackness because Justin's question was really like being a Black artist or creator. And yes, I would say that to me, Blackness is this kind of a fake evidence thing about being differently skin toned. Whereas Africanness would be, and that's very personal point of view on the question, a kind of big question mark, and a very also, I would say, collective, but collective really based on affects. So feelings, emotion, people being what makes me understand, create, oppose, invent my very Africanness. So there's this really kind of nourished by other realities, whereas this kind of Blackness is something that is just, okay, white, black, whatever. It's kind of thing which is so formal and superficial. Whereas I think, and also we were talking previously about this difference, our question of the difference in between art and culture. It seems that at some point, Blackness is something that is really arty. You know, we always have also this kind of history of Blackness within the arts. And then we have Africanness, which is really a thing that people don't know what they're talking about anyway when they're talking about Africanness. All of a sudden they're trying to say, yeah, I mean, people from the institution, in France, they really have this hard time being able to address Africanness. And I have also this really current question, because in France, currently we are at this context of Africa 2020, which is this kind of a really long story short. Every year in France, there is a cultural focus on one country. And for 2020, they decided to make a continental focus on Africa, which is first of all really weird. Like, dudes, come on, not again. But at the same time, so this is the long story short. I'm really putting 3 points, and we can keep going. However, at the same time, Ngone Fall was the director of the season, said, okay, that's what you're gonna do. So let's do this way. Each institution, French institution, who wants to be part of the season will have to work and invite curators, searchers, activists, and artists from at least 3 different countries in Africa, and they will be leading the project. So it was a way for her to hack this kind of really problematic invitation. But it was really interesting also because the French institution, a lot of them contacted me or us as the collective, and they didn't know what they wanted to talk about, saying Africanness. And all they could focus on was our Blackness. It was enough for them that we were Black. No matter where the perspective was a French-based perspective in being a Black person with African origin, of African ascent, they didn't know. And so there's this real difference in between African as being really something that you live, work, and are always kind of modulating and manipulating, and this Blackness that at some point seems super easy to address and to box in and to say, okay, he's Black, it's fine, we've got our whatever parts. I don't know if I answered to the question, but that's, yeah.
Shortly, I actually agree about just Mawena said, because for me, Africanness is very personal, and you have many ways to live it, and it's linked by the way you have been raised and and your roots, how deep you know where you come from, and the institution here in Belgium are very struggling to recognize the diversity within the African communities, if I can say it like that. And like you said, Black is Black actually, and we don't. But they, if they had to choose, I assume that they rather have the point of view of the Blackness from Africa than a point of view of an African descent, Western African descent. This doesn't exist, I think, in their mindset for now, and it's quite complicated to show it. Yeah, to show it, I think. Yes, but for the same, it's I'm really agree with Mawena, so I won't repeat myself.
But I'm also thinking about something. It feels like at some point, like this is also super linked to the colonial context. Also, that I think that at some point Africanness is also related to this museology of Europe really being this whole eras of domination. And so at some point in France, at least, they really love to talk about Africanness, but as being something of the past, also something where they're still into their kind of, I don't know, there were good times, you know, when Africa was still there. And all of a sudden, because also of the decolonization, also the rise of this complexity, because there were so many ways also of trying to decolonize ourselves, and we're still not there, us being the world, it is still really colonial. But then all of a sudden, Black became the new thing. And if now the institution, the white institution, has to talk again about Blackness, it seems that for them it becomes super tricky, because they will have also to think that they have lost this kind of idea and power upon Africanness. So it's way easy for them now to address those issues, and they will always say those issues, not knowing which specific issues they need to talk about. just saying this is about Blackness. And then I guess there's also the influence of the United States, because we're also talking from a European point of view. And then the United States is something that is super wonderful, but also super problematic in the way that a lot of institutional person just like to copy paste the American, Black American model on the realities of the people that are in Europe. But there are so many differences. And what happens also is that in the United States, they were also able to create another culture that is another Black culture, which is not exactly an African culture. So to me, it just adds to the complexity, which is wonderful. But then it is important also not to confuse, and more than confusing, that shrinking, reducing, diminishing, avoiding, hiding all of those differences that actually move a lot. Because I mean, a lot of us have been, okay, I lived in the US for 2 years when I was a baby kid. So at some point I was nothing but Black in the way I would interact also to the outside world. But I was also French Black. So is it African? But then are you just like West African because you speak of French? And so anyway, you have all of those layers. And when I went back to, also I went to South Africa, it was super different also to understand my own Africanness towards other people that were also African. And so we had this Blackness in common, but not the same Africanness at all. And all of these things are just like, just wanted to add that.
Wow, that's really fantastic. And I thank you, Arlette, also for really introducing and problematizing also the question of the ways in which Blackness, even just as a framework, can really be one that flattens, right? It can be one that generates margins as well. And I think that, you know, especially Mawena bringing up the sort of US centric understanding of Blackness, I think it also, it's one that I think is not scrutinized enough, right? The ways in which, especially from the language of sort of like theoretical framework in writing, it wants to be the sort of dominant framer of what this discourse actually leans on and what it represents, you know? But I really appreciate also just the notion of sort of like the weight and cost of education, our educations, the weight and cost of actually arriving at a certain reflection, and the ways in which that, you know, becomes a part of this construction.
I don't know, Justin, if it renders justice to the ones in the, you know, US, like American communities, to say that they want to be dominant. I think it says more about the violence, which is still dominant, for us to constantly think of these different identities that have shaped us and that we also reclaim and reappropriate. And I would just say, because when I think of Africanity, I think of Léopold Sédar Senghor and the movement of Négritude and a very important magazine and a Présence Africaine, to talk, to reclaim a presence. And still we saw that already, what Mawena mentions, and Emmanuel, about the diasporic African community not being as regarded the way that the ones on the ground, you know, would make the liberation movement. So, but still today, I think also about how we embrace the complexities. When I think of Leonora Miano, who talks about African Europeans, or when Audre Lorde came to Berlin in the 80s and had a lecture and met, I will think, I will remember again this great poetess that I love to read, when then this name, or just the identity of Afro-Germans, you know, was one that until today, you know, gives a reality to people here, to say we are Germans, and we are at least of one parent coming from Africa. And we have various communities within that, which is from the outside regarded as Black. I just wanted to say, because this question on labor and how it is valued and how we are more than just curators, I feel it is very sad to think or to even not think of that what we do is going beyond maybe just a business or public making or program making. Again, this says more about how capitalism is still defining what we're doing in the art space, in the cultural space, and the epistemologies. And when someone, I think it was Mawena who mentioned that the student says thank you after certain, I don't know if it was Emmanuel or Mawena, who was thanking you after something, because, you know, the value is that we have understood something, we came closer to each other, to the existence, to ourselves and our relationships with each other. But it has not that stand in the spaces that make that certain epistemology. Sometimes I don't even know if it's even in knowledge producing. So again, they do what has been confirmed already. There's certain canon, which is a weapon. And that's why also they don't know what a certain blackness could be, and on what behalf or on what ground they invite certain people that they perceive as hegemony or having anything in common. These are the things I question, and there I think of Ndakoze, professor who has really established the Department of Africana Studies, again, not as a way to have a dominance in these discourses, but to say that there are various realities. So to talk about Africana is also thinking of the realities of the ones who are Black in the US, who have their realities, but the history which has been detached. And so I had to learn myself also to ask, so would you say you are African American or Black American? Because it's also saying you're American. Why do we have to make these distinctions? But to acknowledge that they are still from the legal system, denominations and actions that prevent yourself from just being, And so Ndakoze, who talks about how Western art is superficial, just we can go deeper because art is an expression of society. And until today, I mean, I cannot debate with people of this mindset, of this ideological mindset, and the way they feel entitled to dominate, to domine a certain discourse on LGBTQI, and then saying that they know it better on how we are multiplicities in our genders. And I say, I'm sorry, but who are you to tell me if on the African continent homosexuality is not reality or not, or is violated or not? Because you talk about homosexuality when I talk about love. And this is a difference. It's still on a superficial basis, I'm not with someone based on a gender or a reality that has been constructed from a society or not. And surely not because of sexuality. So actually, maybe we talk about different things, and the time I spend with you telling me I don't understand what you are saying, because in fact, there is nothing in common there. I prefer thinking of the broader sense of being. And when Professor Ndakoze talks about how in Igbo culture to today, there is marriage between what is in the West considered as men and women, or men and women and women. And I read also in the magazine, in the journal Kwani, that is the same, Again, coloniality is not degré zero, it's not the reference of everything, but before that there has been, and it's still continuing, a culture of women being married to women, men being with men, and so on. It was so much more embracing all these complexities. And we see that the art is still reducing. It's on the level of aesthetics. When we read the Présence africaine, we have a broader collection of Présence africaine at SAVVYZЛЛR and further past journals. We see that there has been a constant debate, when there was this festival des Arts Nègres. We can debate long about this designation that was given, that they give themselves to the Nègre, but when the French authors, they were going there to Dakar and then talking about, oh yeah, it's art, the same way as Quai now, when they say it has been leveled up African objects from culture to art. We can say that it's not even an object. When Kiro Nzego talks about philosophical text and how you can understand the cosmic dimension of this reality shaped, with hands and minds. I just wanted to mention that because it is broader, and actually if it's capitalism, but as Manuel and Mawena mentioned, is a loss of identity on their side that they try to come up with to balance again with bringing us in and explaining them who they are. And I don't want to make this longer.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. I think that, you're also bringing up some of the sort of limitations of a more capitalistic view of what those roles entail, right? And I think that gets also to what we were talking about in regards to the distinctions between the collective and individual role, right? So that capitalistic framing of the role of the curator, of the artist, is about the individual, when perhaps if we envision that as a collective role, then it troubles all of the sort of framework that's placed on it in the first place. So yeah, I appreciate you expanding on that. I think that I wanted to move into our last question, so we can also open up to the audience. You can leave questions in the Q&A box. And it's really within the context of Art Workers Italia, a lot of times we talk through the language of what people may term best practices. And it's about the ways in which we can kind of lead by example somehow. And I wonder what best practices you all feel are central to your own work, your own practice, your own approach to doing things, and if, how, or whether they should be posited towards the sort of pre-existing institutions that surround us, right?
I guess I'll go quickly again. And I think it's just, again, really linked to this individual versus collective idea. I would say that to me, the best practice is collective in a way, because at some point, one might try to find the very best. And Emmanuel, you were talking about how exhausting it is also to think of reframing your projects in order to fit in this kind of box, which is so limitative. And basically, it's just, yeah, as you said also, Arlette, it's just about telling them or teaching them or helping them find themselves at some point, which is exhausting. However, being also a collective, it also helps dividing these kind of tasks that we may or may not find necessary because we have to survive in this world they made at some point, even though we're trying to hack it. But I think that, at least to me, collectivity is really the best practice. And then why it is so cool is because it allows us, I guess, to have this kind of strategy of occupation and disappearance. And at some point, because we're not alone, we can be at very different levels, at very times and progressions in these things. And all of a sudden, if the pressure becomes too much or the possibilities are not possible, we can also kind of extract, but know that we still have this collective work we can still base upon. We still have those safe spaces we can go back to, and we still also have this very, very concrete, which is financial solidarity, which is, hey, you don't have enough food at the end of the month, come and eat at my place. But just knowing that you have those people, those collective people, because let's say you're a group of 10 people, maybe 2 of them will be working their ass off as artists, and they will have some recognition for, let's say, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and the others won't. At some point, things can change, but being a collective is really, to me, like, and so to answer the how can it be positive to pre-existing institutions, I think I also answered, I mean, at some point it's because it is also of energies and saving our energies for ourselves and our projects and not just answering to solicitations or expectations. I think that, for instance, right now, I am really working within an institution, being a PhD fellow of one French institution. Well, it's because right now I do have also this strength and I feel it is fine. But I also know, and it makes me also work with my friends because I'm just bringing them in. Like, hey, I entered one door, I have my foot, so come on, let's grab and take out as much we can. But this will also eventually come to an end. But what we've been able to extract, this is something that makes us build and inhabit our own spaces. So there is always this kind of thing. And also when I'm exhausted and I cannot do this work anymore, well, hopefully I have people I love and admire that can do it. And so it's always this kind of balance and collective balance of energy that is super helpful for me. And on the question also of international collaborations, I guess that we've been here on an international panel, but to me, I didn't think of it as an international panel. And you said big up to Fallon Mayanja. And to me, it's more an organic panel because at the end of the day, we always know people and luckily we move, luckily we just come across someone. And so we can create this network, but as you said, that geography is this kind of mindset, also this colonial mindset. If we do not see it as an international collaboration, but more, yeah, an organic, rhizomatic network that, yeah, goes from these direction to another, then it helps. But then if you're really just about filling in this super amazing recollection of all countries in Africa or blah, 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 I think it cannot work.
Maybe quickly I can answer to oh yes, where I am right now is to, I need to remind me the question. Sorry.
We're thinking about best practice.
The best practice, yes. So it's for now, I don't want to spare any more time to give what is expected from me. So I don't want to spend any more time to explain my approach and to translate it to an institutional language in order to be accepted. It's not an option anymore. So when I work on materials, when I invite some artists, I make some arrangements to give the tools so everyone can understand it. But I don't, for example, in October, I invited Father Mayanja for a performance, and the organization asked me to explain what we would like to see, what kind of world we would like to see as Black artists and Black curators after the pandemic. And I was like, but I think that the pandemic is not an emergency for us because this situation is not new. So I don't see why I should repeat what some of my elders and my colleagues has already said. So I rather to spend the times was offered to me, was given to me to say what I don't want to see anymore. And it was maybe more shocking, but at least at the end of the day, I had this impact of them and some new material for them to reflect on, and some new feedback too. And we could really start a conversation because I didn't, like you say, fit into the box. But I am very realistic that not everyone is able to do it, and I am able to do it because I've made some good alliances on the field during those past 2 years. And And so now my priority is to use those connections and make it profit some of those people as more as I can. And I don't think that I say that I'm not a collective, but there is a lot of people gravitating around the project, and I like to use, you know, their enthusiasm to, when they want to get involved, there is space for them, and that's it. Yeah, another thing is like that I am I try to stay very independent now, so I can say no when I feel a discomfort. But I am aware that I can do it because I have a side job, but it's very important to me to stay away from it. And but I'm working on creating some solidarities with national collective, and like you said, it's the pandemic gave me the opportunities to create solidarities with you guys and other people, and I think it's very important to take care of it so we can become sustainable, you know, but not within the institution, but create our own spaces and have our each other's backs, you know. So that's it. I think, yeah, that's it.
So you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
So I think of what both of you said, and I think it has much to do with the conscious understanding of why we do what we're doing, because it goes beyond program making. For example, the way to understand that we come together as first, again, realities that share time, space, and it's about the people, you know. So when Mawena, you talk about, hey, you need some food I have here, and it's really on that level that we are with each other at SAVVY. So I think when we try to explain it, it's maybe because it's still so much dominant that art is understood as any just logic and way to generate public. And so I see my role in first constantly ask myself why in the first place I'm interested in arts and understanding the living, and how can I always make sure not to forget it and make this claim, as also Manuel, you mentioned, to be independent in the sense that not because I want to do what I do, I need to adhere to the way it has been done in the West, but to tell them it should not be limited to that. So in the past weeks, there are constantly institutions coming and proposing to different SAVVYs, but when it proposed to me, I know immediately why. Because now it's not only, as you said, Mawena, the new whatever trend to do something with the Black people, whatever that means, but then also with a Black woman. So I already defy them and say, let's first have a conversation. Years ago, I would say, okay, sounds interesting and maybe, but now I've learned through that to negotiate. So one of the strategies of SAVVY, and there much inspiration came from Bonaventure, is to always say, we're not interested in a one evening event. It's about a long engagement, long-term engagement. So we start with the research when we want to understand a project longer or in depth. We start with a one-year research. Then we, from that research comes a concept, a proposal. Then we know already also the network we work with, but always bringing some new in. Also, as Mawena, you explained, you have that one foot at the door and open it as much. And I don't think it will stop. I think, as you say, it's like a rhizome. It regenerates somewhere else. And this is a strength that we have seen is coming through today, because artists accompany us, artist contributors, practitioners, they are joining us. And I haven't seen in further institutions that, you know, artists come again in certain discourses, which I think talks again about this capitalist way, use and drop. So you're here, but we cannot, you know, have the same person, because then what is the new? Another way is to, of course, always, you know, question what we're doing, and in order to understand, open up our perspective. So again, I wouldn't say international, but in understanding from another context, maybe political, historical, artistic, and to, you know, I realize that one of the main behavior I experience from ideologic white realities is they don't dare to say I don't know, which is very difficult in order to come together. It's not even, you know, something we can do to yeah, we need to, this vulnerability, you know, to say it's not even vulnerability as a weakness, but it's the strength, and it can always make a spot, open up a space so that we can let someone in. And so this really is a certain a constant pillar that we have. I don't know. And so when yesterday I talked about the poetess I'm much inspired of from the 16th century in Rwanda, Nyirarumaga, who created an academy for poets, because this was the way to remember the history, and created this pattern of refrain, so a new technique. And then I talked with a wonderful person in Rwanda engaging with restitution, Assumpta Mugiraneza, and said, oh, you need to understand, she did not only create the academy, she also institutionalized certain rights, and rights for the fugitive, for example, which now becomes, the fugitive becomes a term for the migrant. But when you understand that actually, you know, when you see it through the lens of the fugitive, the political way, you would give more rights to these you call migrants today. So these are these ways that I'm like, oh my God. And I just also listening to you, I really could, I would love to continue, because I could listen for a long time, and I realized these are the things that also are difficult, you know, how can we make up that time? As you say, Manuel, we need a second job somewhere. So these are the claims that I also make to these institutions. I say, you want to make a program, what do we get of it? When they say, oh no, this is not possible, because I comment all these things, because I say, no, you want a one time, what do we get of that? So for example, if we meet with African philosophers, let us have 1 week ahead to have a conversation with ourselves, that we can also make something out of it, if it's a journal, if it's a video, something that continues, but also all these existences that are so shaky. There's this journal on African philosophy that I subscribed on, and I was so happy that this one platform really engaging with African philosophy without being apologetic. Do we have a philosophy or not? And they are really not on, you know, on a strong, they're always trying to survive. And so I say, just pay them. You want to make something for African philosophy, you would, when this evening is done, you would disappear. So really let them also, with all that they have, you know, and all that we have given that makes their identity today, bring as much as we can in there. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that response. And we had a question come in, but I think it actually also connects to a lot of things that have been said. It's a question regarding the idea of hacking that was brought up by Mawena. And I think that, you know, in a lot of ways, this idea of, you know, once your foot is in the door, letting in many more people is this form of hacking, right? Not producing sort of what is expected or asked of you. That is this form of hacking, right? The whole idea of collectivity when you're invited as an individual is this form of sort of hijacking the plan, right? And I think the same in terms of the strategy of SAVVY, to think like long term, you know, like how do we get beyond the project, right? That you're willing to do as an institution, a project, but then you're not actually committed to any of the things that project represents. And so how do we get beyond that? How do we sort of extend that? And I think those are these forms of hijacking. But if anyone wants to say anything about hacking before we close, you know, it's a good note to close on.
I'm actually going to change my word and also use the word cheating, because that's, so I've been kind of giving classes for the second year now, and I'm always learning the students to learn to cheat. I mean, you've got an exam, you've got the teacher asking, and they're arts students, and they have this moment where they're supposed to say, yeah, my work is about blah, blah, blah. Like, cheat. Actually, you know that teacher, you've been with that teacher for 2 years. You actually know what he or she wants. If you just want a good grade, you know what to say, cheat. It doesn't mean that at the end of the day, you're going to do the exhibition for that person anyway. So if you want, we can make an exhibition for that work to really say what it has to say. But if that teacher is not even interested in seeing what is there, but is actually asking you to explain because he or she cannot see anything, well, it is up to you to choose to cheat. And to me, cheating is fine. It doesn't mean it has to be a strategy, and doesn't mean cheating is about not acknowledging yourself. It is just also an option. I think that hacking is about using the option you want to use now, and all of them are fine. I mean, going really genuine and never saying yes to something you're not comfortable, just do it. If you're able to do it, if you have the resources to say no, if you have the second side job you're talking about, Emmanuel, that allows you to say no, just do it. If you don't, and you still have to say okay because you need that opportunity, whatever the reason, it is also fine to cheat. And again, I think that at the end, what is super important is just to remain genuine and honest with the people you work with. Like, you want to make this work, these new worlds coming through, these new configurations, these new houses. If you're genuine with them, everyone will understand that sometimes you're cheating or sometimes you're doing this or that, because there's this huge difference between who's watching, who's paying, and who is it for? Who are you addressing to? Who are you conversing and dialoguing with? And when you're saying, Arlette, that, okay, this institution might invite you for one evening with a kind of audience that is already a prepared audience, yes, it is an audience that is open-minded and wants to learn a little bit more. But you're not doing it just for this very specific audience of 30 people that already have been able to pay for their tickets and be there. So that's why at some point, what is the good or the best strategy for you, your collective, in order to really reach the people you want to reach? And then all options are good. And this is what I guess I would add.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, you know, that question was tethered to a reflection on the undercommons and sort of thinking about sort of, you know, I think also when you say cheat, it's also about like, who are you cheating? Who's being cheated? You know, it dives into those questions also of the ways in which you are in a sense within the institution being cheated. And so what it means to sort of then turn around and cheat, right? Those dimensions I think are really powerful. I don't know if anyone else has something to add.
I was thinking about, it comes back to my mind, the poet in the 80s, 90s, in the Afro-German context is Mayaim, and how for me, Mayaim and people and values are institutions. So I don't want to spend my time and thinking of hacking or what Aminyolo talked about, epistemic disobedience, because this responds to something which has been set as a certain norm, and I was not there when this was decided, and it is not something which includes even. So I'll spend more of my time on those persons who make themselves vulnerable in the way that they open themselves to a broader sense of the living, to complexities, to be a woman, to be an artist, if we talk about German as a reality in which we live in, or European, but to be many at once. And so this institution, which is a value, this is the one really, I think, I keep on when I, continue on that, what I feel is what it is, what it's worth living for, and not be distracted. I think it was Toni Morrison who says that racism is a distraction. And I think with your works, Emmanuel and Mawena, it's you've coming really upon that, and it's not an easy thing to do years, and in these distractions we are in constantly. And COVID, as you say, Emmanuel, is not something different from the constant distraction we're facing. So I just want to continue on that and make sure that it's strengthening.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much. I wanna sort of conclude by thanking all of you for participating in this conversation. And I really appreciate the depth and insight that you all brought to it. It's been a learning experience, which I hope it was for everyone. And these are the kinds of shared discourse that I hope we can engage in moving forward. Thank you. And thank you, audience, for being here. I want to thank the European Culture of Solidarity Fund for supporting this project. And the recording will be available on the Art Workers Italia YouTube channel, so that you have access to this conversation in case you want to share it with those who missed it. And next Saturday, we have the last of the 3 conversations, which will be how to get paid. And so I really thank you. And you can stay tuned also for the forthcoming development, which we will have on the Art Workers Italia website, which is designed to sort of share a tactical, practical, and strategic reflection on the conversation that we had tonight with everyone, so that these are tools and strategies, hopefully, that we can all begin to apply. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.